Hey, welcome back to another review. My name is Nick Fulfaro, and today I'm going to be talking about something interesting I watched. Pokémon Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. Quite a name, I know, but that's because this movie is a 3D computer animated remake of the original 1998 hand-drawn anime Pokémon movie, Pokémon, the first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back. The Pokémon company really knows how to nail their movie names, right? Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution was released in Japan on July 12, 2019, but wouldn't get a worldwide Netflix release until Pokémon Day on February 27, 2020. So, to reiterate, this is a remake of the classic first Pokémon movie during the height of Pokémon mania in the original Game Boy games Red and Blue. This movie was the first piece of media that featured the 150th and 151st Pokémon, the legendary Mew and Mewtwo, giving the origin story of the latter, who, as you can tell by the consistent titles, strikes back. The original movie, to many people, is soaked and saturated in nostalgia, with that movie representing a major movement in their Pokemon fandom. I'll say, for me, I remember this movie semi-fondly. I guess I have some level of nostalgia for it, but I was a little too young at the time to have any vivid memories of my first time watching it. I have much fonder memories of the next movie in the series, Pokemon 2000. So going into the Mewtwo remake, I was kind of in the middle of having some nostalgia for it and feeling like I was about to watch it for the first time. Because of those two facts, I've decided to break this review into two primary sections, discussing Mewtwo Evolution's strength as a 3D animated remake and its strength as a standalone film. So, let's get started and discuss this new movie's strength as a remake. Just to be clear, I didn't rewatch the original for this review because Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution was supposed to be a pretty faithful, almost shot-for-shot remake. I didn't want this review to devolve into just listing the differences between the movies, and instead wanted this section to focus more on the abstract experience of watching a 3D remake. The question I was more interested in asking was how this movie made me feel, having this memory from my past literally redone for a modern audience. If you're interested in literally seeing the differences between the movies, I'll put a card to a pretty good IGN video that does just that at the end of this review. You should check out after this. So, let's discuss the movie, beginning with the most obvious target of discussion, the switch to 3D computer animation. The biggest and most glaring criticism I have for the switch to CGI was the clear limitations in character animation. Everything unanimously across the board looked less expressive than it did when it was hand-drawn. To further explain, character models are more clearly in stiff standing positions when they're not involved in action, probably to lighten the load on the 3D animators. Adding to the distance of character expression was the strange cinematography in the movie, which tended to prefer wide shots for some reason, which are traditionally great for showing big action but usually fail at showing characters' emotions. Close-up shots are the opposite, allowing us to become close enough to a character to appreciate the details of their face or body language, but aren't great for communicating spatial relationships or action because you're too close to the character to see anything. So in this movie, wide shots are constantly used, almost obnoxiously in my opinion. Movies tend to strike a balance with their shot choices, mixing in wide shots, close-ups, medium shots, a little bit of everything depending on what the scene calls for, and to keep the visuals engaging. I don't want to give the wrong impression. This movie definitely includes a variety of shots, but I felt like more often than I felt necessary, I would notice the camera defaulting to wide shots to the point that a lot of heavy moments felt a little lifeless or devoid of emotion because I just wasn't close enough to any characters to see what was going on. This lack of emotion I felt was also compounded with the 3D character models themselves, which had drastic limitation of emotion in comparison to hand-drawn strength. And, of course, I feel like this isn't indicative of all 3D or all 2D animation, but I felt the 3D character models used in this style weren't rigged in a way that could possibly match the exaggeration and personality that hand-drawn anime Pokemon was always able to achieve. In hand-drawn animation, it was a lot easier to go off-model and exaggerate facial expressions, body language, and details because there was no rigid 3D character model to hold them back or to break. While talking about the limitations of 3D models, I'll also bring up the lip sync, which was presumably synced to the original Japanese dialogue and is much more clearly off when dubbed for an English audience than the hand-drawn alternative. I was thinking it might just be something we as an audience have come to accept in traditional anime, that we're just used to the trope of improper lip sync with dubbed animation, that when it's applied to something so new and fluid on these glossy 3D characters, it just appears strange again until we get used to it. However, I've been beating up the 3D animation a little much so far, so I wanted to change the topic to a compliment. The Pokemon battles are a lot of fun in 3D. The motion is really organic, and the opening title credits battle had a lot of personality and fun choreography. I really enjoyed that, and it upscaled really well. But, real quick, I need to mention, I noticed weird frame rate drops in the movie, like when Pikachu used its Thunderbolt attack. So instead of being a consistent smooth frame rate like we're used to seeing in movies, temporarily the animation became very choppy, which was very strange, especially in 3D. Frame rate drops are tolerable in video games when the game is rendering information, or in traditional anime, which uses lower frame rates anyway, but here in a 3D movie, it was just a weird style choice to try to convey the power of Pikachu's attack. Didn't really work for me, it didn't really translate well from the anime. But anyway, back to positive stuff. The Pokemon models and the visual style in general deserve to be complimented. It doesn't look like Pixar, which, cool. I'm glad to see successful 3D animation that doesn't feel like it has to conform to Pixar or DreamWorks' usual standards. All the Pokemon models look great, the characters look totally fine in this style. I wouldn't call it necessarily superior to the original hand-drawn style by any means, but I think it's fine and worth praising for at least attempting something different. I don't think there were any Pokemon models I specifically didn't like besides maybe Mewtwo itself, which I remember looked really cool and edgy to me as a kid in the original movie, but looks kinda puffy and uncanny in 3D. It didn't break the movie, but something that came to mind. But I gotta mention, I was horrified to find out that my favorite Pokemon wasn't even in the movie. Number 126, the Spitfire Pokemon, Magmar. That's not a joke. My favorite Pokemon has, for the longest time, been Magmar. And I've heard all the jokes from the fact that it's got a butt on its head, that its Japanese name is Boober, all of it. But I'm telling you, it is legitimately my favorite Pokemon, and it was nowhere to be found in this movie. From what I could tell, I don't think it was in the original either, but I'm deducting some serious points from my final score. Ruined the whole movie for me. But anyway, getting serious, getting back on track about the 3D animation, my biggest compliment for the visuals has to go to the water textures and all the lighting used. The models are good, but the water and lighting are excellent. Fascinatingly good. For how dependent a lot of this story is on weather and water, the animation team absolutely nailed it to the point that off the top of my head, I can't think of water or lighting I prefer in any other 3D movie. If the character animation could be strengthened for future movies, I think whatever process they're using right now for the environment can't be undersold for how stunning it looks. The new voice cast seems serviceable, different, and maybe it's my nostalgia talking, but I obviously prefer the original voice cast from my childhood. But for the sake of remaking the movie, the current voice cast is fine. Their acting gets the job done, though I don't have any specific compliments to deliver to anyone in particular. So now, that was sort of my nostalgia-coded takeaway from the movie's worth as a remake, but now we should talk about, from the most general and standard of viewing experiences, what was this remake's strength as a movie? We'll go a little bit more linear for this section. The first couple minutes are breakneck, explaining Mewtwo's origin, but I feel like it tries so hard to say so much and set up so much exposition without actually explaining anything. The movie definitely expects you to know a lot about Pokemon and Mewtwo already, making the first 10 minutes seem simultaneously too slow for the people who already know Mewtwo and too fast for the ones who don't. Honestly, I didn't remember this opening from the original movie. Apparently it was there all along and I just didn't remember it, but I actually thought they added it just to this movie. Fundamentally, from a story perspective, I think the opening scene weakens the entire movie to some extent in a major way. Though it tries to explain a lot about the movie's featured Pokemon Mewtwo, I feel like it structurally weakens the overall story and mystery of the rest of the movie. We're kind of told everything about Mewtwo in the first 10 minutes before any of the main characters are introduced. We know everything that the main characters are going to have to be explained later in the movie anyway. There's not a great level of tension from this fact. There's not a major benefit to knowing all this information before the characters do. It just kind of ruins the fact that we knew all along that Mewtwo was a clone of an ancient Pokemon. We know that it's unreasonably strong. We know it can communicate with telepathy, and we know it considers itself the greatest Pokemon trainer and better than humans. All of which would have been awesome reveals had we learned this stuff organically throughout the story with the rest of the characters. While discussing communication in the story, I felt the movie said a lot of its thoughts literally, which, to be fair, is understandable because it's definitely trying to be accessible to a younger audience. And I'll also just mention story details I found kinda less than successful in the movie as a whole. This is really strange, but I guess I misremembered how many trainers actually made it to the island to challenge Mewtwo from the original movie. In that version and this one, only 3 trainers besides Ash, Brock, Misty, and Team Rocket make it to Mewtwo's island, but I could have sworn like 50 trainers made it when I was a kid. I think I mixed up the scene of all the trainers in the Pokemon Center and just assumed that they all made it to the island, but nah, only 6 trainers total fought Mewtwo, which from a story perspective is kinda confusing. I made a note to myself that I didn't totally understand what Mewtwo's master plan was. Like, I feel like I half got it, and I understood he wanted something, but I wasn't really completely sure what his end goal was or what he wanted. Like, I think maybe he wanted to free Pokemon from humans, but he cloned Pokemon, and he considered himself the strongest trainer. Like, what did he plan to do after he cloned all those Pokemon? And what was the point of battling the trainers if he was just going to steal and clone their Pokemon anyway? And I guess it's important for me to make the distinction that these questions probably have answers in the movie, answers that I could have easily missed. But I just found it important to note that even though I sat down and gave this movie my full attention, I don't feel like I really remember any of those answers myself, and would have preferred if the movie just communicated those ideas a little clearer for dum-dums like me, you know? I also think it's important to talk about emotional weight in the movie because, like I mentioned before, the character animation didn't really deliver on that end. So there were clear parts of the story that felt like they were supposed to be weighty, but fell sort of flat from a story perspective. The penultimate fight between Mew and Mewtwo, the thing I'm animating right now, where the latter finally confronts the Pokemon it was cloned from, was honestly kinda suspiciously boring. I'm not entirely sure why, for how magical and powerful these Pokemon were, and how big the fight between them seemed like it was supposed to be, it just didn't feel like it came together like it was supposed to in my head. And another thing I misremembered from my childhood, but I thought that all the cloned Pokemon had markings on them in the original movie, like the Venusaur, Charizard, Blastoise, and Pikachu clones did. However, all the other Pokemon clones look exactly like the original. Like, Pokemon all kinda look the same already anyway. For example, your Magmar looks exactly like my Magmar, so even if one of them was a clone, it doesn't really matter. And I think maybe that was supposed to be the point. So in the final climactic battle when it was original versus clone, you weren't supposed to be able to tell the difference because the movie clearly wanted to drive home the fact that Pokemon shouldn't hate each other and go to war over their differences. But I feel like the message personally would have been stronger had the clones looked visibly different, doubling down on the fact that we shouldn't hate each other for our differences, because we're not so different after all. And I just think a clone with visible differences would have made that duality a little stronger in my opinion. A major compliment, despite all my jabs at the emotional weight of the movie, is the bond between Ash and Pikachu. Ignoring the comparison to the original, the bond between a boy and his pet are universally understandable, and their bond is very cute and well integrated into the story as a whole. In the climax of the story, Ash sacrifices himself to stop the battle between Mew and Mewtwo, which is an iconic scene at this point because he's literally turned to stone, and that moment is still really powerful. But again, this is despite the other human characters, whose models look barely fazed at seeing their friend literally die. The scene as a whole was heartbreaking, but was 100% sold by Pikachu. That mouse sure can act. Carried the whole movie. The scene is resolved with Ash getting revived by the tears of all the Pokemon. Another iconic moment from the movie which, admittedly, makes absolutely no sense from a story perspective, but dang it, I love that scene anyway. Who cares? It's still really powerful and beautiful. Pivoting to the other technical aspects, the sound mixing left something to be desired. Ambience was frequently abandoned at points in the movie, leaving scenes feeling strangely empty and disconcertingly quiet. Music, when it was used, was great and ambient, no complaints there, but the absence of sounds, like stuff to fill out the space, like explosions and fire and just interesting sound design in general, was something I felt was a major flaw in the movie. And I mentioned, I didn't really mind the new voice cast too much, but I think they were at a distinct disadvantage because the sound design was just so interestingly weak. It's tough to make your character sound good when everything else around them sounds empty. So, with all that said, I'll wrap up my thoughts and give the movie a score. In closing, the 3D animation in Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution worked well to convey the choreographed action, but failed to impress in terms of character acting and nuanced emotion. I feel like it's really interesting that the thesis of this movie is at one point summarized by Mew to Mewtwo, that the strength of a Pokemon doesn't come from its physical might, but its heart, which I feel is interestingly contrasted against the movie as a whole. I can't really say I saw the heart of this remake. If anything, its visual beauty succeeds in spite of that. This movie feels like it has a heart made of 3D modeled plastic. Like I can see what they were trying to do, I can admire the effort, but I'm left wanting the emotion, the nostalgia of the original, something that I feel this remake just couldn't quite replicate. So in a very strange, meta way, I guess this movie isn't quite as heart-driven as Mew, but an impressive but misguided clone of the original, like Mewtwo. And, most importantly, because there was no Magmar, I give this movie a 0 out of 10. No, I'm just kidding. It's probably more like a 4 out of 10. Hey, thanks so much for checking out this review. As always, your support means the world to me, so all the YouTube stuff, liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing go a long way with encouraging me to make more of these videos. So, I have a couple questions for you, because I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Did you watch this movie? What did you think of it as a remake? And was the switch to 3D animation worth it in your opinion? But anyway, my name is Nick Fulfaro. Thank you so much again. I can't thank you enough. Thank you, and I will see you very soon.